Welcome to another episode of Professor and the Idiot. I'm Nick Wolfinger.
And I'm Dalton Whitehead.
And we have another guest this week. I am very pleased to introduce Jasper Bernes. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Jasper?
That is correct.
Jasper is... I'm going to have to cut that out because I fucked up. I didn't have the right file open. Okay, here we go. But otherwise, I won't do much editing. Okay, Jasper is the managing editor of Commune magazine. He received a PhD in English from UC Berkeley in 2011 and a master's in fine arts from Cornell a few years before that. He's the author of a book called The Work of Art in the Age of Deindustrialization, published by Stanford University Press 2 years ago. He's also published 2 books of poetry. He's taught classes at the San Francisco Institute of Art, UC Berkeley, Cornell, and other universities. That is an impressive CV. But I know Jasper from jiu-jitsu, and in doing so, I learned that he is the editor of a magazine called Commune. Tell us about Commune, Jasper.
Well, Commune is a print quarterly and website. It launched in October of last year, though I and some other people had been working on it for about a year before that. And it's we like to think of it as what we call a popular magazine. And by that I just mean something that pretty much anybody can pick up and read and not require any kind of specialized information or background to understand the articles, as might be the case with, academic journals, for instance, or kind of more specialized magazines coming out of different activist scenes. So it's a popular magazine of revolutionary politics. So, basically, the stuff that we publish makes the case that the world needs to transform radically over the next dozen years or more, if humanity's going to make it.
So some might say that the world is going to transform. What we need to do is kick all the immigrants and all the non-white Americans out. That's an awful vision. How is yours different? And sorry, Dalton, I was supposed to let you talk, and I talked over you. So let Jasper answer, and then I promise I'll shut up for a little while.
Well, right. There are lots of different types of transformation. It's my view that this social system that we've been living in for the last several hundred years, capitalism, which really kind of matured in the 20th century, is probably coming to an end, in the 21st century, and something else is probably going to replace it. It could be just as bad or worse, or it could be better. It could be a kind of egalitarian society that isn't, based around class, and that doesn't have, people split into different types with different life chances as a result of, some system of social sorting, and that, but the possibility that I'm interested in is, sort of kind of emancipated society that's based on equality and freedom. And I think, there's been a wish for that kind of society for, as long as capitalism has been around, and much longer, in fact. So it doesn't really matter what you call it. But, I think that desire for that is a kind of an abiding passion in the modern world.
I agree. Dalton, you're supposed to ask the question now.
So
do it.
What?
Do it.
Why do you think I am? Why do you think capitalism is coming to an end?
Well, I think there's a number of ways to think about it. One is that capitalism was based around sort of access to resources and forms of energy and power, fossil fuels, primarily coal, oil, gas, and our ability to continue to use those is coming to an end for a number of reasons. One of them is that it's destroying the biosphere and, jeopardizing the life of everyone on the planet and all kinds of species. The other is just there's not so much left, and at some point, it's actually probably farther off than we thought, but at some point there's just not going to be enough cheap, accessible oil. And you're no longer going to see the same kind of increasing productivity that you saw throughout most of capitalism. Capitalism is built around an endless cycle of growth, and that endless growth requires, cheap energy and cheap resources, and we're just kind of running out of this. So that's one reason. Another reason is that I think, the sort of, for reasons that are sort of separate, capitalism is having a hard time increasing productivity. One of the problems with it is that it makes people kind of useless, and so it tends to kind of expel people from work. It doesn't need workers anymore, but then that makes it harder to kind of increase productivity. So that's one of the problems. But then there's just kind of, the ecological limits of capitalism that we're starting to reach. So, there's going to have to be some kind of reorganization of society. It doesn't have to be a reorganization that makes everybody more equal. It could maintain inequality, but do it through other kinds of mechanisms. Eco-fascism is some kind of increasingly likely possibility. Building those walls, establishing some kind of basic survival for most people, and encouraging, kind of conformity through various technological and, other kinds of persuasive means, media, whatever.
What's eco-fascism? I know there's a punk rock band whose name I've always laughed at called Vegan Reich.
No, yeah. I think the idea would be that, this New Zealand white supremacist terrorist, right, who's a kind of identified fascist and had a lot of ecological ideas about why he was doing what he was doing. He sort of thought that he needed to protect the whiteness of New Zealand against this kind of invading horde of migrants, and that was connected to kind of ecological values, preserving the kind of ecosystem, which is very bizarre given that it's a kind of colonial situation there. It's not like it belonged to the, to the white people who were there in any kind of way, but nonetheless, he was in favor of kind of building the wall and excluding, all non-white people from the island in order to protect the ecology and protect, white life, as it were, there. And I think that's an example of eco-fascism. Sense that the survival of your chosen race and the survival of the ecosphere are intimately linked. It'd be a kind of, it may not have to be fully fascist. It could just be some variant of kind of nationalist politics that has a kind of ecological bent to it.
I know, though, the European far-right parties, all of them are interested in environmental issues and climate change. They're not like the American far-right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's no reason that the left has to have any kind of monopoly over that as a cause for concern, right? If you're paying attention, it's going to concern everybody, even people who have really, repulsive ideas about who deserves to be, who deserves to bear the brunt of the climate. I think, and increasingly, as more and more people find it difficult to ignore that it's real, it's happening, the climate is changing, you're going to see more of that.
Let me push back at something you said and sort of channel an argument Dalton would make. Are you familiar, you guys, with the bet between Paul Ehrlich and Julian Simon?
No.
So
I don't know what that is.
Okay. So Paul Ehrlich was and still is a very well-known scientist at Stanford. And he wrote an influential book in the 60s called The Population Bomb, which basically said population is going to explode and we're going to run out of resources. And so he placed a very famous series of bets around 1980 with an economist named Julian Simon. And the way they monetized this bet was that they picked a bunch of commodities and they said, are the prices going to go up as Ehrlich might anticipate, or go down?
Mm-hmm.
And Ehrlich lost every fucking bet. Right. In other words, capitalism solves these energy problems. We're running out of oil. Great. Look how well solar's come along in the last 10 years. You would make that argument, wouldn't you, Dalton?
Yeah, you could many times throughout history say, "Oh, this is going to be the end," or "We won't be able to." It's too big of a problem to solve. But I think with the population and I don't know, human beings, like we always find a way. I think we'll always be able to figure it out, unless an asteroid destroys us.
But more than
I don't think that's really true. If you look at human history, there's all of these kinds of periods in which civilizations just essentially collapsed, and there was people kind of reverted to other ways of living for thousands upon thousands of years. So it's in certain parts of the world. So I don't know that we can count on kind of continuous presence of civilization. Certainly capitalism has been able to find new energy sources, but they've all been fossil fuels
until now.
But these kinds of renewable energy sources, they haven't really been demonstrated. They're not being used in any extensive way, and there's a reason for that. They're more expensive. Yeah. They require more, outlay up front. And there's just, there's like, if you wanted to replace every, watt of energy in the United States with renewables, you would have to use almost 25% of the land. It takes a lot of space to use that. It's not clear that space exists, especially if, farms are going to continue increasing and we're sort of pushing to the edge of, what habitats can withstand. There was this article in the, was it the New York Times Magazine last year about the insects disappearing. There's been a collapse in insect populations by a factor of 8, and that's not a warming issue. That's just an issue of subdivisions and different kinds of human habitation just spreading further and further, and it's causing all kinds of crazy problems in nature, exploding tick populations and collapse in insects. And so it's not clear how much more land there is. You can take 1/4 of all the land and put solar panels on it. The other problem with solar and renewables is that it's not consistent, and capitalism wants to have modulatable energy sources so that it can access more. Well, to be able to have more energy at any time and be able to change how much energy you're using at any particular time. But solar and wind, you don't get them at certain times of the day. So at night you don't have solar power. If the wind isn't blowing, you don't have energy, and that causes a problem. So what they do is they end up, sort of bringing in fossil fuels to supplement that, or you have to store it in batteries. But that makes it more expensive, and you're really not saving a lot of carbon emissions if you're building big, massive batteries as well to store the energy. So there's just a lot of problems with fitting this other kind of technology onto the way we live now. So it's true, these people that said we were running out of resources in the 60s and 70s, they were wrong. Yeah. There turned out to be a lot, even the people who said that we were running out of oil 20 years ago turned out to be wrong. They're able to capture a lot more oil out of these fields, and the price of oil has collapsed as a result. The U.S. now exports more oil than anyone else in the world. But I think anybody you talk to doesn't think that's going to last forever. If you look at the proven reserves, coal will probably last forever, but oil, no. But again, like I said, I don't think that's not the main limit. The main limit is that everybody agrees if we keep pumping CO2 into the atmosphere,
we'll all die.
Exactly.
What about nuclear energy?
there's that. Well, so nuclear is an option people talk about, but there's not enough uranium. Not enough cheap, accessible uranium. You couldn't mine it at a price that would make it, competitive to offer nuclear power. Some people talk about getting it out of the ocean, but that hasn't really been proven.
I don't know the science of it very well, or even know much of any science at all. But can plutonium also be used in nuclear reactors?
I don't think there's much of that either. I don't really know, but I mean, I know that there's, I can send you the information about, kind of the inaccessibility of nuclear. There was a project set up by Google a few years ago, and they got together, the smartest people, and they had them, they set up a kind of think tank and had them study the problem of renewable energy and energy transitions. And their main goal was to try to figure out a way to provide a non-fossil fuel, zero-emission energy source that was cheaper than fossil fuels. And then the scientists just shut down the project after a couple of years and wrote this letter saying, like, we don't think it can be done. Maybe some other kind of technology is going to be invented in the future, but we did the math and we looked at it in all these different ways, and we just don't think you'll ever get it cheaper. So through the market, you're not going to be able to do it. Because, and the reason why is that, you don't just have to, maybe right now solar and wind are cheaper than fossil fuels in certain areas. In some places it's cheaper, and they can be sort of competitive, but they have to be much, much cheaper. And the reason why is that you have all of these people you have all these corporations and capitalists who've already sunk billions of dollars in fossil fuel infrastructure. So to convince them to switch and just scrap their plants and their factories and their refineries, you have to make it way, way, way cheaper, because otherwise they're just going to continue to kind of recover whatever investment they can. So, it doesn't have just to edge it out by a couple pennies. It's got to come in, half as cheap. And that's nowhere. Yeah. That's nowhere in sight. So then some people say, well, you tax it or you subsidize it. There are a lot of problems that come up that way. So
Dalton and I actually talked about this in a podcast before. I don't know if maybe I persuaded you that energy is a sector that definitely needs government involvement, because the existing energy companies are basically like commodities funds, and they don't have incentive to innovate to new fuel. Anyhow,
totally.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know. Did I persuade you on that, Dalton? The energy research, maybe.
I mean, I can't discount certain benefits that certain benefits of government-funded research and technologies. I'm not like an anarchist, so I do think there is a role for government. I'm just very displeased with the power and actions of our government, so that's a big reason why I'm a libertarian. But no, I don't think I'm not against that idea of government having some involvement in the energy sector of the economy. I haven't done much reading on that, so I'm open to that.
Right. Jasper, I'm always the one arguing for the government.
Right.
So let's get back to the magazine and the desire for revolutionary transformation. What does that look like? Is it more Menshevik and gradual, and democratic, or more Bolshevik and by a coup, by seizing power through an armed insurrection?
I don't know if either of those really, fit with the way I think it's going to happen. I mean, we're in completely uncharted territory, so it's probably not going to look like any of the revolutions of the past. I mean, one thing that and this is something I might find some ground for agreement with Dalton, is that I don't really think that state is a kind of instrument that can be wielded by the people in order to produce kind of benevolent results. I'm quite anti-statist in my views. And another way to put that would be that I'm quite, democratic in my sense that I believe that people need to be really, a revolution needs to allow it so that people have some participation in the kinds of things that matter to them, so that they're involved in, making decisions that affect them, and that you kind of, the goal of revolution should be to kind of distribute power to, across the entirety of the society, right, and not concentrated in the hands of a particular body or group. And in that sense, I am somewhat of an anarchist. So, that's I think the goal, but how that can come about, I mean, I think there are lots of different pathways, but I think that capitalism requires constant growth, and that means that means certain death for most people. Billions of people stand to billions of people stand to die in the 21st and 22nd century as a result of from climate change.
Oh, okay, all right, right. But
and so so capitalism requires this just this constant growth, and I think there's no way to get around having constant growth and continuing to pump the atmosphere full of CO2. And so, we need a society that's not built around growth, but that's really built around, people's needs, which aren't the same thing. And so, so I think we're going to have to figure out a way to consume much less energy, to reorganize society in such a way that is, radically egalitarian, but also, minimal in some aspects, but also preserving really the things that we care about, like antibiotics and medicine, and access to the kinds of things, products of civilization that really matter for us, and less access to the kinds of stuff that's just nonsense and really doesn't benefit anybody but the very wealthy. I mean, we live in an incredibly wasteful, inefficient society from any kind of measure other than profit, or just GDP output. Right, but GDP doesn't really correspond to welfare or happiness in any kind of way.
That's definitely true.
So I don't really know what that looks like. I mean, I don't believe that actually these things come about a result of the ideas of smart intellectuals who then tell everybody what to do. I think that they come out of really desperate situations where people try to improvise and figure out the best way to survive and better their own condition. And I think those are the kinds of situations that, for better or worse, lots of people are going to find themselves in the next decades.
But what alternative? I point out, when we ask it this way, I point out that medicine and a lot of the technology we depend on for our quality of lives was all the product of capitalism, and innovation in the 20th century experiments in non-capitalist societies didn't innovate that much, unless they had to go to war.
I don't know that's certainly true. The Soviets were able to. I don't really think that they are a really good example, because I don't think that society was very equal in really any significant way. And I wouldn't call it state capitalism or capitalism, but I also don't think it was socialist or communist in any stretch. It was a kind of collectivist developmentalism, right? And it mimicked capitalism, for instance, in its commitment to kind of industrialization and relentless growth. All that said, they were able to put together a space program that beat us that beat the United States for a decade or so. They had really sophisticated arms industry. They just weren't able to do anything else. But they did top-notch science for a long time. They stole all they got half of the Nazi physicists, and they were able to do pretty. They were able to build nuclear bombs and put people into space and come up with efficient weapon systems and build airplanes. So I don't know. It's certainly the United States has been the center of innovation, for most of the 20th century. But that actually, was largely done through the Department of Defense, which was, not really a market platform.
That is, well, partially, right? Certainly there was funding, through DARPA, there was a lot of, there was funding of science, but then the market took it and ran with it and took it to scale.
I think, personally, and, maybe I don't have a lot of ground to stand on, but I think that, a true kind of egalitarian society would do, where people were, where, free time was distributed, among people, and lots of people could kind of pursue their interests, and more people could take part in science and learning and devoting themselves to those kinds of things. I think that there would probably be very different kinds of innovations, because the types of problems that society would be trying to solve would be very different. But I think that, there'd be all kinds of development. It would just look different. And also, I'm not sure that, innovation is the real need for society right now. I think it's more about distributing the kinds of the benefits that already exist. I don't really, know that there's, pressing technological challenges.
Sure, there is climate.
Sure, but it would be great if somebody came up with some fix to it. I don't think that's going to happen. And, I think that we've had more or less the same kind of paradigm in terms of, energy, and that we haven't really actually been, if you think about the innovations of the last 70 years, there really haven't been that many, aside from, it all comes out of World War II. In terms of a kind of whole new paradigm, the last one was the kind of transistor and the stored program computer. That stuff is pretty old. So I don't know. I don't really think that there's some new, cold fusion or some kind of new paradigm shifting technology out there, really. But that remains to be seen. If that existed, maybe we'd have a different conversation. But it doesn't seem to be anywhere on the horizon. And none of the people who know anything about climate science are recommending any of these high-tech solutions. None of them seem to be very promising, according to the scientists. So that's changed, but right now, if you read the International Panel on Climate Change, which synthesizes all of the findings, their main carbon disposal technique is what they call bioenergy carbon capture and storage, where you kind of you essentially grow plants and then you burn them and you capture the smoke and ash and you stick it in the ground. That's the best technique. That's the best technology that we have right now. So all this fancy stuff where you have factories pulling carbon out of the air, they don't think that stuff is tested enough to really be feasible.
So I think I don't know, where should we go? I could take exception to the Soviet Union as a model for growth. A British diplomat once called them Ghana with rockets, because all they did was spend money on the military.
Well, I agree with that. I actually, agree that in terms of they have really high GDP, but it goes to show how little GDP really matters, right? In terms of the standard of living, it increased somewhat, but not massively. And what they mostly were able to do is generate these massive piles of raw resources, tons of coal and steel and all that. But they're really bad at doing anything else aside from building rocket ships. But they couldn't produce a car that people really wanted to use or whatever. But again, it was a really stunted and deeply unfree and deeply broken system. It's nothing like anything that anybody would try to create. So,
did it ever have good prospects from the beginning? Would it have been more sustainable, say, if the Bukharin's new economic program in the 20s, which introduced market reforms to farming, if, Bukharin had become maximum leader?
No, because the whole idea was, so, what happened was that, Lenin found himself in the middle of this revolutionary situation, and he and the Bolshevik Party decided to kind of go for it because that's essentially what the people wanted to do at that moment. But everyone within the Bolshevik Party, and most of the other radicals, the anarchists, the Mensheviks, everyone else, they understood that the fate of the Russian Revolution was going to hinge on the larger European Revolution, and particularly the German Revolution. So once the German Revolution failed, once that was definitively over by 1922, 1923, and it didn't really look like things were going to kind of shake out in their direction in Germany, at that moment, Lenin said, let's do state capitalism. He didn't think that they were doing socialism at that moment any longer. That was the new economic program. Yeah. So they just wanted to go back to to kind of state capitalism.
But imposed by a dictator.
Well, he was not they were not Stalin. They had a different idea about it. It was Stalin who then kind of tried to kind of remake that into something else. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that they didn't think there was any prospect. All they wanted to do was develop the economy so that maybe later they could do socialism, which is sort of the idea that China has followed. So I don't think that it is much. I think there was another thing they maybe could have done, but certainly that's not an idea they had. They wanted to do, to develop. They wanted to mimic capitalism in a socialistic manner, and that I think was a bad idea.
And to take the China example, China's wealth didn't start rising until the 80s when they started introducing market reforms. Does that say anything about the prospect of a revolution?
Well, no, not really, because because I think that China again had a kind of model of developmentalism and the kind of growth of the economy above all else that is completely different than any kind of vision of socialism or communism that I think I would have. So it's that they ran into a wall doing something that I wouldn't recommend anybody do doesn't really invalidate my vision of the future. So, and they were able to do a kind of miraculous thing with still maintain kind of political control over the economy while liberalizing in terms of, the financial system. And it's been it's impressive and fascinating, but certainly nothing, neither the Mao era nor the kind of Deng Xiaoping era are, a kind of model that anybody should follow.
So, how will this happen? How will some sort of revolution happen?
Well, I don't really know. That's my point, is that I'm sort of I don't have a program or a blueprint that I can offer to people. What I know is that as people become increasingly desperate, they tend to do something about their situation, and generally the best ideas tend to kind of emerge spontaneously from these revolutionary movements. And so I've really just been trying to pay attention to what people are doing in the world, people who are kind of struggling against the oppression that they encounter. And I think that, that's how I'm going to figure out what to do. But I think that things are just becoming more and more difficult for people. So one way it might happen is people just, there are kind of increasing insurrections and uprisings as people try to, break out of straitened circumstances. That may happen, in the context of an economic crisis, which, capitalism really hasn't banished in any kind of way. It may happen in the context of a kind of ecological crisis or kind of a disaster produced by climate change. Or it may just, happen out of, people just, organizing themselves and through a kind of act of revolutionary will, kind of imposing some other state of affairs. I don't know.
Why do you say people have become more desperate when standards of living have risen around the world, even in the U.S., where there are all sorts of problems with inequality, and and in the developed world where there's a lot of dissatisfaction of a lot of things, yet standards of living have continued to rise?
I don't think that that's true, actually. I mean, in the United States, standards of living have not risen. Wages have stayed, the same in terms of real wages. They've been largely stagnant for about 40 years.
That's men who didn't graduate from college's wages. Everyone else's wages have increased.
Well, we could disagree about this. There's a number of ways to read it, and whether you're dealing with wages or households. You have to think about how long people are working or what they're getting for the input they put in it. You have to think about the all these different kinds. I mean, I know you're a sociologist, so let's just say we maybe disagree about that. But I think that there's been, certainly compared to the 30 or 40 years previous to, say, the period from 1980 to now, or 1973 to now, things have been quite stagnant.
I'm certainly more sympathetic to that assessment. Let me ask you one more question. So, this will be a complex two-part question. I sometimes think about the end of the Communist Manifesto, where Marx, writing in 1848, talks about some of the things he hopes to see in communism. For example, a progressive or graduated income tax. We have that. Yeah. It's not as progressive as I might like, but we have it. Universal schooling, paid for by the government. We have that. Less poverty in rural areas. We have that. So some of the things he wanted seem to have come true, and at the same moment we have a newly relevant number of socialist politicians in America, like Bernie and AOC. How do you feel about them? And how do you feel about if we've gotten to where Marx wanted to get to anyhow?
Oh, well, I think those are two different questions.
Okay,
they're both really
fair enough.
About the list at the end of the Communist Manifesto. Yeah, it's quite remarkable how what a mild 10-point program that is, right? It's kind of and you're right. A lot of things in terms of universal suffrage and universal free education, those things are things that people struggled for in the 19th century that we now have.
Yeah.
But I also think that those were, those demands. I mean, that was a document that was written in the context of a particular revolutionary moment that was, it was a liberal bourgeois revolution, and they recognized that, and they were sort of intervening within it. So I think that if you ask Marx and Engels 20 years later if that's what they wanted, those 10 things, they would say no. They had a much more expansive vision, but they were sort of, they were meeting people where they're at, as it were.
Oh, I see. I see. So how about Bernie and AOC? Do they represent the kind of revolutionary moment you'd like to see?
No, they don't. I mean, one of the reasons why Commune exists is in order to kind of establish a rallying point for people who are kind of anti-capitalist and, dissatisfied with the organization of our society, but who don't have a lot of hope in this kind of socialist Bernie AOC moment. And that's not to say that I don't find it hopeful that so many people are talking about these ideas. But I don't really have much hope for the chances of Bernie or AOC to do the kinds of things that they want to do. In fact, one of the things I'm writing for Commune right now is a critique of the Green New Deal, and sort of a long, articulation of the many ways in which it won't work. So I think that there's a real danger that people put their hope into these kinds of party and state initiatives that are, in my view, bound to fail them. And I can explain why I think that's the case, but there's just so much evidence of that sort of failure.
Let's talk about grappling.
Okay.
How did you start? Dalton and I met through grappling at Salt Lake Grappling Club, and that's where the podcast came from. He would ask me questions, and I would try to answer, and then he proposed the podcast, and it was a great idea. And I met you through grappling. So how did you start doing jujitsu?
Well, I got into martial arts and self-defense around 9 or 10 years ago. I just wanted to do something like that. I thought that I should probably know how to defend myself. I thought that if you're a revolutionary, you should probably know how to fight. You should probably be able to take a punch. I started studying Krav Maga, and I did that for, I still do it. I've been doing that for, I guess, maybe 10 years or a little less. Yeah. And the place where I was doing Krav Maga also had a grappling class, and so I did some no-gi grappling there. But I wasn't getting enough of it in my diet to really make any progress because of my schedule. And so, so I decided to try out Bei Jiu-Jitsu, and just in order to get a little bit more time on the mat. And, so I've been doing that for a couple years now, or I guess a year and a half or something at Bei Jiu-Jitsu. I'm kind of more focused on grappling now. Just because I don't have a lot of time in my schedule, and I find that if I do it fewer than 2 days a week, I just don't make any progress whatsoever. So,
as someone who's made very, very slow progress, I feel you.
I'm an incredibly slow learner. Yeah.
Unlike some people in this conversation.
Absolutely. I see people all the time who come in and they're just naturals. I'm not a naturally athletic person. I'm kind of uncoordinated and spastic, and so it takes me a really long time. I'm going very much against the grain, and but I actually really like doing things that I'm not good at. I find it's really humbling in an excellent way, and so I think that kind of like lifelong white belt idea there's a lot to it. So I don't know. Yeah, I like the fact that I can go and do this thing that I'm not very good at, and it keeps me honest.
Did you spend any time rolling in the gi?
I've been training in the gi a bit lately, and I've been going to a gi class every week, and I kind of hate it, but it's good.
Good man, Dalton, or good man, Jasper. Good man.
Yeah, I hate getting gi collar choked all the time. I hate that I can't just get up. There's just a lot of habits that I've learned in no-gi that do not translate. Like turtling up is a terrible idea in gi. You're going to die instantly. So, it's much harder to, the whole thing that Riley's always saying, just stand up. That doesn't work.
Yeah. How did your tournament go, Dalton?
Not good.
Tell us about it.
It was sub only, no time limit, no points or anything. So my first match was I think over 10 minutes. I'm just not in good enough shape, and this guy was in really good shape.
Oh, wow.
He locked up a Kimura. He was going after Kimuras a lot. I was getting the better of him and all the exchanges, and he locked up this Kimura grip on me, and I thought I could get out of it and straighten my arm, but his grip was still in good enough shape. He was able to get my arm bent again, and then finish the Kimura. So.
Oh, shit. Were you looking for that Kimura counter where you spin around an armbar?
No, it was a weird. I'd have to see that video because it's such a long match. It's like hard to remember. He like had my leg. I don't know. It was a very unusual Kimura position. I'd have to see it again to like describe it. But
was his back to you? I've seen really nasty Kimura setups or finishes where they somehow get it if the person's back to you, so you have to basically go through their body to defend.
I don't think so, but I remember like he had one of my legs. Like I was on my back. Oh, God, I can't even like remember how this whole sequence, but it was pretty weird because he had one of my legs tied up with two of his legs, and I was on my back with my hand like underneath, or my arm underneath me, and
the other arm.
I honestly, I'd have to see the video. It was such a long match, and I was so tired. All I know is he submitted me, and that pissed me off. So,
how'd the second match go?
It went good. It was against Mafu.
Oh, did you win?
No, he went for a leg lock, and I got my knee. I cleared my knee, and like in some leg lock positions where you can like kind of like circle around them, where like they still kind of have your ankle, but you're on top of them, and you can. You can sprawl your leg out.
Yep.
So I thought I was able to do that, but my knee got kind of tweaked from the first match, and you know how there's like that calf slicer you can get from that type of position, like when a guy is trying to get out of your leg lock, but if you still have his calf, the calf slicer type thing. So I started to get on top of him, but my foot was caught on his hip, so it started cranking on my leg pretty hard, and I didn't want anything to get hurt because I got to do construction, so I had to tap.
Oh shit, dude.
I took him down a couple times, so that was cool.
Cool. Does this make you want to compete, Jasper?
I do want to compete.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it at some point. Just to do it. I mean, it's interesting because I've been doing Krav for so long. Krav is defined by not having a competitive aspect, right? Just oriented towards these kinds of imagined street scenarios.
I've taken some Krav.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting training in a place where everybody's competing, or not everybody, but a lot of people. And so, it makes you want to compete. So I'd like to try it. Of course, the problem is when you're as old and as bad as I am, you don't really get your pick of. It's not easy to find somebody who is, as clueless, old, and in the same weight class as you, right?
Oh, tell me about it. I've had some matches like. I had a match a couple years ago against a 19-year-old kid, and his dad was in the same tournament, and his dad was younger than me. The last time I did a sub only, the guy was 15 years younger than me. That's okay. He also weighed 50 pounds more than me. That was okay. I made it to third overtime. But and I'm smaller than a lot of people I'm smaller than a lot of people. I'm often the smallest person in the, on the mat that day. So, or at least of the men. Got it. But I don't care about losing. I'll try to win, but I don't expect it. But it'd be nice to do it in no gi, but I'll do it in the gi. Why? Why the gi?
Oh, well, I just think there's more options, right? I mean, I just assuming that I'm going to have to do it because there's not so many no-gi options.
Oh, no, if you go to Naga, no one does the gi. It's almost all no-gi.
Okay, well, you'll have to tell me next time Naga comes up, and maybe I'll try.
Got any?
That's like once a year, though, right?
It's twice a year, but I don't.
Oh, okay.
I've only done it once here because it's always in San Jose, and I'm too
Right.
lazy. Maybe I should just
know.
commit now to doing the next one. Dalton, I was gonna say, Dalton, you're competing more than either of us. Got any competition advice for Jasper?
Learn how to wrestle. That's probably the most underused tool in competition grappling for especially guys that didn't wrestle. Like I didn't wrestle in school at all.
Right.
I really fell in love with wrestling. I enjoy taking somebody down as much as I love submitting them.
Yeah, I love
that's like an honest thing. I'm like a lot of people don't think that way or feel that way about it, but when I take someone down who's good, that is just as satisfying as choking them.
Yeah, no, I have a wrestling. I think I have a wrestling soul, and you know, it's good that it's really emphasized where Nick and I are training. So you know, it's like we end up doing a lot of wrestling. We end up working kind of wrestling concepts and ideas, and that is I kind of want to do it. So I think that you know.
It's always better to be on top. So
yeah, that's absolutely Riley's philosophy. I mean, that's his whole perspective.
So I go to Bay and Riley says, if you're on the bottom, you're going to get beaten to death. And I go to Salt Lake Grappling Club where it's just as wrestling focused, but the logic is, you know, going out and in a grappling match and pulling guard, that's just not cool, right? You just don't want to be the guy who immediately sits.
Right.
But shit, I don't care if I can win. I'm not going to get beaten to death because I'm not going to be in any street fights. In a grappling match, I don't care if I win. I don't care if I don't look cool.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Really, ultimately, obviously, in a jiu-jitsu situation, pulling guard works. I mean, especially in the gi.
Yeah.
I just agree spiritually with the idea that you shouldn't do it. You know, that's just who I am. You know, but I think, you know, if you're our age, it's a good idea maybe to pull guard. Wrestling is, you know, the thing that I love wrestling and I think it's a good thing. But the thing you have to say about it, it's hard on the body. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
very hard.
You know, it's especially if you're dumb like me and you often take people down with your head. You know, I jam my head into the mat more than I should. So, you know, pulling guard is you're gonna do. There's less wear and tear on the body. So, and you know, there are guys who say that's why they do it, and I respect that. You know, I mean, you're just trying to be able to have some longevity and, you know, roll throughout your 50s and 60s.
Look at Eddie Cummings. He's always pulling guard. It works for him.
Oh yeah. I mean, obviously at the highest level of jiu-jitsu. I mean, I don't think there's really any coherence to saying it's not the right thing to do. I just think that, you know, I still have that self-defense perspective, and I don't want to get habits that aren't going to really translate into the street. I mean, I'd like to just be, you know, and I just think. But I mean, there is something to the idea in a point situation that you can win on points.
Yeah.
You know,
you can't
wrestle and try to win on points. You don't have to submit the person. Yep. You know.
Yep.
So I think that's a valid strategy. But I mean, if you have a wicked guard, sure, use it. You've got a great guard, Nick. So, you know, I don't. Well,
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you work your butterfly leg lock transition stuff, and you know, you got your game.
Yeah.
It's a good game.
Yeah. Hey, anything either of you guys want to add before we call it?
No.
Anything about grappling?
Check out Salt Lake Grappling Club.
Wait, we're here in California. If you visit Salt Lake.
If you visit Salt Lake, if you live in Salt Lake, if you're listening to this, check out Salt Lake Grappling Club.
Agreed. There's not a better place to train if you're in Salt Lake City. It's
cool.
I only really stayed in the sport because of the patience of my coaches Jack and Pat at Salt Lake Grappling Club. If I was so unathletic and old. If it hadn't been for those guys, if it had just been Riley being mean to me, I don't think I would have stayed.
Right.
Now I can take Riley being mean to me.
Is Utah one of those? Is Utah a kind of wrestling culture type place?
Oh yeah.
Like all the kids wrestle in high school.
So it's not Iowa, but
right.
There's definitely some wrestling. Cale Sanderson, one of the greatest wrestlers of all times from Utah.
Oh, right.
So we've had some good guys. Utah Valley University, this little school, they in the past little while have consistently put out some really high-level college wrestlers. I think this year one of their guys was ranked number 2 in the, I think, 166-pound weight class.
Uh-huh.
So, there's some good grapplers and good wrestlers out here.
That's cool.
I mean, my experience, just compared having rolled a lot in California and rolled a lot in Utah, is in Utah, any random guy I'm rolling with is 10 times more likely to have been a wrestler than here.
Right. Yeah. That's what I figured.
Yeah.
Some places where everybody just wrestled as a kid, and it's amazing. I can when just on the mat, I can tell who did that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's so many people you can tell, and they just have this. They come in and they bring that with them, and it counts for a lot. It makes a big difference.
Oh yeah, totally. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jasper, for doing this. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I was a little bit. I don't feel like I know you wanted to talk about the magazine, and I got lost in the weeds. I apologize.
No. This is a podcast. We're all about going off topic. And,
I hope it'll be interesting to some of your listeners. Yeah.
And we're all about going off topic. And unlike most podcasts, I'll never ever, have. And now we're going to take a quick break and play some bullshit music.
Right.
We don't do that. And the other thing, like some podcasts, they'll introduce the host and then they'll say halfway through, our guest is Jasper Bernes, and then repeat a long introduction. It's like it's a fucking podcast. It's not a radio show.
Right.
It's not unless someone clicked at the beginning. So we'll never do that. All right.
Right.
Thanks, Jasper.
Thanks, Nick. Nice to meet you, Dalton. Best of luck.
Nice to meet you.
All right,
Thank
maybe
you.
we'll all roll. Maybe they'll get Dalton out here to come roll at some point. Thanks for listening to another episode of Professor and the Idiot. If you like what you heard, go to Apple Podcasts and give us a good rating so that others may find us and we can expand our social media juggernaut. And if you didn't like it, fuck off to the place you came from.